In this video, we will walk through how to use the PQA Focused Practice Prioritization Sheet with your team to identify and focus on quality practices for the first part of your cycle. In our Assess, Plan, Improve cycle, teams usually start the fall with an internal observation, get an external observation, and then use the scores during the huddle phase to decide what to focus on for the rest of the year. Here's the reality. Staff turnover or small teams can make internal observations tough. For some, the tool feels disconnected from their daily practice, and for many, it's just one more thing on an already full plate. So, how do you build relevance for staff and start being intentional from the very beginning? In this video, we'll walk through a process that can help your team take a right size approach that works for you. One of the key areas Sprocket supports is program quality assessment using the tools developed by the Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality. While we often call them assessments, these tools are just as valuable for planning and professional development. They provide a shared language and a clear framework for what quality looks like at the point of service. There are multiple PQAs. Here we're looking at the SEL PQA. We also have partners that use the YPQA. This PQA includes 4 domains and 10 scales. Each scale is made up of 3 to 6 items, specific practices that represent quality in that area. Each fall, Sprockets host an SEL Basics training, sometimes referred to as the SEL Internal Observation Training. You can also purchase an online self-paced training directly from the Weichert Center's website. Well, that tool can feel like a lot. As I mentioned earlier, for some programs, especially at the start of the year, it may seem overwhelming or like an extra add-on to programming, but really the PQA is about programming. So I want to share some supports your team can use to take a right-sized approach as you step into the PQA at the beginning of your cycle. This is the Focused Practiced Prioritization Sheet, a guide to help your team identify which practices to focus on at the beginning of your cycle. Yes, every practice matters, but narrowing in on what's doable right now will set you up for greater success. This form helps your team talk together and choose 2 to 3 scales to focus on. Once you've identified them, you can use staff meetings, program planning, or professional development to intentionally build around those scales. Before your huddle, you'll complete an internal data collection to bring with you. That, along with your external observation, will help you check in on how your program is doing in those areas. Remember, the PQA reports are just snapshots in time, but the conversations that you have about that with your team, what you've tried and what you've noticed in practice, what you've learned will be the most valuable outcome. Ideally, this also gives you a chance to celebrate progress and then either identify new scales or adapt your original focus as you continue to grow. Now let's take a quick look at how this sheet works. On the left side, you'll see the 4 domains: safe, supportive, interactive, and engaging. The left column lists the 10 scales, each made up of 3 to 6 items. Altogether, that's more than 40 practices measured. This sheet is designed to meet you where you're at. Even if you're not deeply familiar with the PQA, it's a simple, doable first step into collecting quality data this cycle. At the top right, there's a space for programs who have been using the PQA, have had observation experience, have read their reports. And if you know that there's certain scales that you already have embedded in your program, you've seen that in your reports, you don't need to focus necessarily on this year. That doesn't mean you stop doing them. It just means that you can shift your energy to focus on other areas. On the far left column, the big X is for scales that don't feel applicable right now. Maybe your program structure, your focus, or staff readiness makes them less realistic at the moment. Sometimes staff may push back on certain scales, and that's okay. This process is meant to be relevant to your team, so honoring that input matters. It can actually help to start with the areas where there's agreement. That way your team gets an early win and some momentum. Then, when you circle back to those tougher scales, you'll already have a foundation of success to build on. I'll also share a few tips later for working through resistance, but for now, just mark the X and move on, knowing you can always revisit it when the time feels right. The middle 3 sections are where the real conversation happens. You can go with your gut, or if you're familiar with the tool, open it up and use it as a reference. Either way works. So the smiley face means your gut says, hey, we've got this. Even if you haven't had an observation before, you feel like you know what it means. You feel like you're doing it in practice. The neutral face means your team has talked about it. Maybe the practice isn't consistent in programming or across staff. And the questioning face means maybe it's new to your team, either because of your structure, or maybe there's some unfamiliar terms, or your program isn't currently set up to use that practice. Here's an example of what it might look like as you and your staff work through each item. You can go with your gut when marking the sheet, or if you're familiar with the tool, like I mentioned before, you can use that as a reference. As a conversation unfolds, your team might even change their mind, and that's a good thing. That conversation is the real power of talking about our practices. Then you identify your 2 to 3 scales to focus on. As you decide on your focus areas, consider questions like, where's there the most energy or interest from staff? What strengths can your team build on? Which scales naturally connect and could reinforce each other? Or what practices would make the biggest difference for your young people and your staff right now? You may be asking yourself, what if we don't want all of the items within a scale? What if we just want to focus on specific items? Do what is going to be the most successful for your team. There is intentionality around all of the items being kind of bundled together for those scales, but if breaking it down further is helpful, do what makes sense for your team. Once you've identified your focus scales, set aside time soon to discuss what those practices look like in action. For example, you might debrief one scale at each staff meeting or dedicate a month to each focus area. On the Sprocket CPI resource page, in the PQA resources folder on the right-hand side, you'll find supporting documents, including the backside of the prioritization sheet that's shown here. This also is the backside of the Getting Started with the PQA guide, which is just another approach to this conversation. These reflection questions can help you as you're digging into those items and scales. The full PQA tool is also there for a reference. Each activator partner will receive a username and password for Scores Reporter, where you'll find options for entering your own PQA self-assessment scores. Any staff trained in self-assessments can't complete a traditional observation, and there's a handout for that as well. But if that's not feasible, here are some alternatives. You can use the tool for a reflective team discussion, scoring together with the rubric and noting evidence. You can have staff complete a partial observation over time, multiple sessions, and then meet together for consensus scoring. And if these sheets don't quite fit your needs, feel free to reach out for a thought partner. Glad to help you talk through how you can create some internal observation scores to create your internal report. And remember that you will also get an external observation provided through Sprockets. A key benefit of self-assessments is the flexibility. You can focus only on your selected scales. In Scores Reporter, simply mark the items you aren't scoring as NS, meaning not scored. Avoid using the X option, that has a different meaning. A video tutorial is also available to walk through that process, so you don't need to worry about it now. I hope this all feels doable as a starting point, but as I mentioned earlier, if you run into resistance on certain items, it's okay to move on and focus where there's agreement. At the same time, the areas that spark the most tension can also open the door to meaningful big picture conversations. I often find that when people share where they feel like a rub with the tool, it helps me grow as a youth worker and see things from multiple perspectives. If you notice pushback, here are some prompts you can use to guide the conversation. Invite your staff to define what these practices look like in your context. Use the examples in the tool as a starting point and then ask, well, what would be relevant examples for our program? How do these practices show up in our daily work? How might we create a metric for this scale? The goal isn't to redesign the tool, but to find language that resonates with your team, language that reflects what they know and see in practice. That way, the process feels both meaningful and usable for everyone. Sometimes your team may feel that a particular scale doesn't quite fit your youth. When that happens, discuss what quality practices for that scale could like within the culture and experiences of your young people. And consider inviting the young people into the conversation as well. Keep in mind that race and culture are not a monolith. Young people often carry multiple identities, so stay open to different perspectives and focus on creating a space that honors all. Sometimes a score of a 5 may feel out of reach, given your program structure or context. If that's the case, talk honestly about your realities and consider whether a 3 might be a more realistic goal. The important part is having the conversation. But do challenge yourself to ask why, and not just once, but multiple times. For example, I once worked with a drop in program that didn't feel like they could do reflection. That wasn't a part of what their structure was like. And so I asked, why is it not possible to get a 5 in reflection? The response was, because youth are coming and going at different times. So then asked, do reflections have to be all at the same time in a group, or could that look different? The staff ended up creating a variety of creative exit reflections, like sticker voting prompts, a graffiti wall, and other quick ways for young people to reflect and make meaning of their time there, no matter how long they were in that space or at what time they left during programming. So, yes, you can decide that, we're okay as a program to have this 3. And I would encourage you just to dig a little deeper to see if there are ways to think about those scales in your context differently. This last discussion point may feel uncomfortable, but it's a powerful one. What do our young people truly deserve? Ask yourself, why might we think our young people shouldn't have this opportunity? Here's an example. I once worked with a program serving teens who face significant challenges outside of the program. Staff noticed resistance through their disengagement, their words, their actions, and really they felt like small group teamwork would not be successful and that it might even cause more conflict. So that concern was real, and many programs share it. But I've also seen the power in programs when they build community, create leadership opportunities, and foster safe spaces for connection. And yes, even with what may seem like a difficult crowd. We want young people to develop the skills to collaborate, to lead, to connect. If they or we don't feel ready, our focus can shift to foundational practices that prepare for those opportunities, building a safe environment and a supportive environment. Those practices are the foundation of the PQA and are important to be able to create those other opportunities, those interactive and engaging opportunities. So there we have it. The prioritization sheet is designed to help your team identify 2 to 3 scales to focus on right now. Scales you can discuss together, practice intentionally, and strengthen consistently in your program. At the huddle, both your PQA observations and your personal reflections can guide you, helping you decide where to go deeper within your chosen scales or giving you the confidence to identify and strategize around new ones. Remember, continuous program improvement isn't a checklist to complete, it's an ongoing process. With focused practice, you can move the needle and sustain quality programming over time.